When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject: the door in the floor. User: 19 extra STK. Posted September 2nd, 1994.
The first apartment I ever lived in was haunted. At the time, I was pushing back against my Catholic upbringing by going through an atheist phase, convinced that the only real things were the ones I could see, touch, or hear. The experiences I'm about to share challenge that view of the world, and now, more than 20 years later, not exactly Christian, but I've had to expand my worldview. It all began in the fall of '72 when I left high school for college. No one in my family had ever gone to college before, but it was the only reasonable way to get a draft exemption. The apartment was above a family-owned grocery store and way bigger than it needed to be. The landlord, Mr. Gillespie, said that it had originally been 2 apartments he and his wife had combined into one when they started their family. Now their kids were grown and gone, and they owned a house a few minutes' drive away, so they were willing to rent the place cheap to the right person. I was apparently that person. There were 2 bathrooms, a living room, and 4 bedrooms, way too much room for one person. I don't remember what the rent cost anymore, but it was cheap even for the time. Mr. Gillespie explained that he'd rather have one good tenant who could comfortably afford to be there than a rotating group of strangers pooling money and not respecting the space. That had been the case with the previous tenants, and he'd learned his lesson. We shook on it, and I moved in later that day. I managed to scrounge up a bed and hi-fi from a second-hand shop and walk through each bedroom to decide which I wanted, ending up in the one at the front of the building. At some point in the days after, I was on my way out when I glanced in the room at the top of the stairs. I don't know how I'd missed it before, but it was easily the biggest and brightest among the bedrooms. Why hadn't I picked this one? I shook my head and resolved to move my stuff when I got back. For some reason, it slipped my mind. Classes started before I had much time to settle in, so if anything strange happened, I did notice. That all changed on the night of November 16th when I was out in a bar with some classmates and a news report about the police action at Southern University came on the television. 2 boys had been killed by police, and it weighed on us. We all said our goodbyes and called it a night. When I collapsed into bed, I couldn't get the thought of what had happened out of my head. Those kids weren't any older than us, and they'd been snuffed out like it didn't matter at all. I was furious. I was sad. I was scared. In my head, I could still hear the hubbub in the bar, and then, all of a sudden, it was outside my head, too. That is to say, suddenly I wasn't just remembering the sound, I was hearing it again from the kitchen outside my bedroom. The first sound I could identify was clinking glasses, and since my apartment was close to the train tracks, I thought it might be a passing freight, but then I heard silverware on ceramic as if people were eating. It sounded like someone in the kitchen was having a dinner party, and not a small one. I wish I could say I jumped out of bed and charged into the kitchen, but I did exactly the opposite. I kept my eyes closed, pulled the pillow around my ears, and stayed that way until sleep came. That was the beginning of what I've come to call my supernatural year, which lasted until the end of my first year. Mostly it was mild stuff, a feeling that I wasn't alone, flashes out of the corner of my eye. It wasn't sinister, just odd and unsettling for someone with no grounding in that kind of thing. I kept trying to write it off as my imagination, but then an unexpected interaction made that impossible to maintain. It was an evening in the spring of '73. Some friends and I were having beers at Pizza King when one of the new waitresses, Shelley, came up to our table. She was a beautiful girl, maybe 5'2" and curvy with curly brown hair past her shoulders. I was about to order another round of Schlitz when she interrupted me. "Hey, are you Jack?" My friends looked at me like I'd just grown a third eye. I said I was. "Can I speak to you for a minute? In private?" I wasn't exactly known for pulling women, so the guys were in a state of total incredulity, and frankly, so was I. "Sure, lead away." I followed her over to an empty pool table and tried my best to look cool. It wasn't my finest moment. "So, what's shaking?" I asked. She looked around conspiratorially, then said, "I hear you're living above Gillespie's store, is that right?" This wasn't the way I'd hoped the conversation was going to go, but I rolled with it. "Yeah, that's right. Why?" She put her tray down on the rail of the pool table, freeing her right hand up to fiddle with one of her curls. "Have you noticed anything up there, like, unusual, I mean?" I stammered for a second. Unusual how? Like feeling as if someone else is there, but you're alone. Maybe seeing things or hearing them, things that aren't there, like. The dumbfounded expression on my face must have confirmed it for her because she nodded her head. I thought so. I managed to shake off my surprise long enough to ask her how she could possibly know that. Her voice dropped low enough it could barely be heard above the jukebox. My girlfriends and I were the last people to live there. It was so weird. We thought it was perfect. Cheap, lots of space, but we weren't there a month before that funny business started. One of my roommates, Lori, used to babysit a little girl and would sometimes bring her over so we could all gossip while she was working. That girl was maybe 5 years old and would play in Lori's room. She never got in any trouble, but she did start talking about her invisible friend. She'd tell us about the games they'd play together, about how it would come through a door in the floor. It? Yeah, it. She said it wasn't a boy or a girl or even a person, but it spoke English fine so they could be friends. Once that started, Lori started sleeping at her boyfriend's and moved out pretty quickly. Word got around and we couldn't find another roommate, so we all left. Then I heard a student had moved in. I was sure Shelley was pulling my leg, so I tried to smile, but the serious expression on her face stayed right where it was. "You're serious?" "Has a heart attack, darling. Have you seen it yet?" "You can't be serious." "So that's a no?" "Well, don't say I didn't warn you. You're cute. I'd hate for something to happen to you." Shelley picked up her tray and was about to leave before I managed to suppress my doubts long enough to ask a question. "Which room was Lori's?" She stopped. "Right at the top of the stairs, biggest bedroom in the place. Bet you don't go in there, huh?" "No, I guess I don't." "Well, now you know why." She walked away, her hips swinging to the beat of the jukebox. When I got back to the guys, they were practically salivating. I lied, of course, said it had turned out we knew some of the same people, and one of them owed her money. They didn't believe me, but her asking me out and me not telling them was even less likely, so they let it go. When I got back home that night, the stairs seemed longer than usual. They weren't, not really, but it felt as though I'd walked 2 stories more than usual when I finally got to the top. The big bedroom was dark, but it didn't feel empty. I averted my eyes and went straight to bed. Then, just as I was closing my door, I thought I saw a flash of light down the hallway, shining against the wall. There was only one room it could have come from. What did I do, you ask? I locked my bedroom door, closed my eyes, and wrapped my pillow around my ears. Then, the next day, I started looking for a new apartment.
Subject, visitor. User, No Fear 5. Posted, March 4th, 1997.
Living in LA, you get used to weirdos. It comes with the sunshine, I think. If you've ever taken even a cursory look into the city's history, you know you could die of old age before you finish reading about all the cults, religious orders, and prophets who've had their 15 minutes in the LA basin. Mesdasnin, Helios, Nishians, Tensegrity. These are just a few of the names on our city's lunatic fringe, and while I always knew they were there, I never thought I'd end up joining them. For clarity, I'm not planning to start a cult or worship the sun, but something happened to me recently that I can't tell anyone else. I can't bear the thought of my friends or family looking at me the way I would look at someone who told this story to me, so instead, I'll share it anonymously here with you. It was a normal night, a Sunday around 10 p.m. in the Hollywood Hills. My property is a good size, with a treed yard that's almost twice as big as the house itself. I had just settled in to watch Rosie when my Pomeranian Charlie decided he wanted to do his business. Once the first commercial break hit, I picked him up and took him out onto the back porch, turning the light on as I went. It's not a very powerful bulb, but it's bright enough for Charlie to see what he's doing so long as he doesn't wander far from the back steps. We have a sizable number of oak trees in our backyard, but the biggest by far is also the nearest to the house and is 100 years old. The porch light just about reaches the trunk, though its branches extend far off into the darkness. That night, instead of trotting off into the yard and doing his thing, Charlie refused to move after I put him down. Annoyed, and with Rosie starting back up in the living room, I tried giving him a nudge, but it didn't budge him. The poor little guy was trembling, his fuzzy little head tilted up toward the distant branches. I followed his gaze, and that's the moment I joined the Goonie parade. About 3/4 up the visible portion of the tree, just about where the light couldn't reach, I saw what looked like a large light patch on the trunk, maybe 5 feet in height. I rubbed my eyes and looked again, but it was still there and had features. I could make out what looked like arms, then hands, then fingers. The effect was odd, like my brain couldn't interpret what my eyes were seeing and had to resolve it in pieces. Then there was a quick movement, so fast I couldn't place where it had happened. Then it moved again. It was a blink. Jesus, I thought. It has eyes. The entire picture resolved itself then and started to break my mind. You remember that Whitley Strieber guy? They made the Communion movie a couple years back about him getting taken away by little gray aliens. I swear on my mother, that's what this thing looked like, except it wasn't gray, but an off beige. It was skinny, its tiny arms and legs somehow clinging to the tree. It blinked again, then scuttled up the trunk into the darkness above. I grabbed Charlie and ran back inside, locking the door behind me. I ran through the house, twisting shut every blind, closing every curtain, and turning on every light. My job involves getting high-profile people out of the idiotic situations in which they've found themselves, and doing so with a minimum of outside involvement. So believe me when I say I've seen things. I once snuck a world-famous actor's son out of a house in Tahunga where actual human sacrifices were being performed. I've been in more shooting galleries than the LAPD, but nothing in my long career could have prepared me for what I saw that night. And afterward, I sat in the middle of my living room clutching Charlie to my chest. Hours later, when I calmed down, I put some newspapers in the kitchen for Charlie and peeked out the blinds on the back window. The tree was visible, but no beige patch or otherworldly visitor. Of course, that didn't mean it wasn't there, and I hunkered down again until morning came. Once dawn broke enough for me to be able to see the entire length of the oak, I went back into the yard. As best as I could see, whatever had visited the night before hadn't left any trace. Understand, I don't believe in aliens the way that Strieber guy does, but I won't rule out the possibility. After all, it's a big universe, but why the hell would they be in my backyard? Unless what I saw wasn't an alien at all, but wanted me to think it was. I don't know if that possibility makes it better or worse.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.